My name is Brian Postlewait. I am the father of the 13-year-old young man who didn't want to stand up. It's really a pleasure to be with you all this morning and to have an opportunity to share with you. These lights are very bright. Did you know that? So we have been in in the middle of the series. So if you are new, or this is the first week you've been here for a little while, we're going through the 7 last words of Christ, which really aren't words, they're phrases, and they're not in order in any of the Gospels. Actually, they are spread throughout all 4 Gospels. And the order is, I don't know, somebody at some point in time put it in order, but it's been with us for centuries. And in some ways, this is a very tough way to go through Lent. As you might know, Sundays are supposed to be feast days, perpetually, forever, a perpetual celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. But our pastor decided that Sundays through Lent this year, we're going to be specifically looking at the cross and the 7 very tough, very hard words of Jesus. So we will blame him. And it is. It's in some ways, we want a hopeful word. We want a good word. And Lent is a time when we have some work to do as individuals. There's some digging to do. There's some, it's hard work. And so, in reversing our feast days, 6 days a feast day, but on Sundays we're into the cross. I'm going to try to end us in a hopeful place. But as Pastor Dwayne said last week when he said, "I'm not here to entertain you," I'm not sure how much I'm going to entertain either today. These are hard words. This is difficult stuff. But I'm going to end with communion. It's already laid out. It's already prepared for us. I'm going to move directly from my sermon into communion. And so there's not going to be a lot of fanfare or transition. You'll know when it happens. I've already given instructions to those that are going to serve that when I begin to pray for the elements, they will move up and be ready. And when they're here and when you're ready, you will be invited to come. And when we come to this table, it's an opportunity for us to have a moment with the Lord. And so I hope that you'll take that opportunity, that when you come up, that you'll come with a posture of receptivity and openness, that maybe you can even come, and I've seen some people do this, they walk to the table with their hands open like this, as if they're going to receive a gift. Maybe you'll want to take an opportunity not just to receive the elements and then move back to your seat. Maybe you want to kneel at the altar and spend some time here. That's okay too. Or to take the elements back to your seat and just to wait and to prepare yourself before your seat. However you come with intentionality. Come with purpose. Come with your grief or your sadness or your joy. Come with your need. Come with your confusion. Come with your doubt. But come consciously. Come present in the moment. Can we do that? All right. So this morning's passage, it remind you, this is the 3rd week in the series. The first week, it was, we were, and I'm going to draw a blank. The first week, can you remember the first week? Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. Last week, today I'll be with you and you'll be with me in paradise this week. And let's bring the scripture up, and you can stay seated. Does the scripture come up? There it is. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. Gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Jesus' family was in front of the cross. I don't know how far or how close they were, but it must have been close because they could converse and hear one another. There were the three Marys and the disciple whom Jesus has loved, and we aren't quite sure who that is. Maybe it's John, the evangelist. Perhaps it's James, his brother. Perhaps it's someone else. We're not quite told who it is, but they're close. They're very close. And there is his mother, who's been on a journey. Teen pregnancy, shotgun wedding, an escape to Egypt, life on the poor side of the tracks. Jesus makes his ascendancy. She follows him around. And now here, maybe unexpectedly, at the foot of the cross, no parent wants to see their child suffer. Every parent tries to shield their children, to help them avoid pain and suffering. But the one truth you know as a parent is that there's no way to avoid the pain of being human. I remember when we first moved to Orlando about 2.5, 3 years ago. And it was quite a trek. We moved from Vancouver, Canada, and 4,000 miles, a long drive, and a new home, and new schools. And the kids, we dropped them off at the front door, not knowing what would happen. And that first day for Maddie was really hard. The second day, I thought it went a little better. The third day, I went to pick her up, and she got into my vehicle, and as a parent, I'm hopeful, that maybe she met a friend. Maybe she had a good time. Maybe she had a kind word from a teacher, but she popped into my car and burst into tears. "Daddy, please don't make me go back to that school ever again." As a parent, your heart breaks because there's not really anything you can do. No matter who you are, even, you can, trips to the emergency room are difficult enough, but emotional pain, right, as a parent, gets you right there. No matter who you are, even for those of us who grow into adulthood seemingly with everything perfectly in place, the inevitability of the human condition comes for all of us. Pain and suffering, it does something to us. It does something in us. It's almost always leaves a wound behind, whether it's physical or emotional. And this morning, I'm going to do something a little risky as a preacher. I'm going to share a little bit about my own pain and woundedness. And I say risky because I don't want to draw attention to myself or make myself out to be a hero or make you feel sorry for me. But if I have anything to say worthy of saying, if I have any authority to say it, it's rooted in my journey and my own pain and suffering. And in sharing my story, before I do so, I need to let you know what I don't know anything about. What kind of pain I don't know about. I don't know the pain of poverty. Now, I didn't grow up rich. I still remember my mom putting clothes on layaway at Sears. But I never grew up knowing what it was like to be without a meal. I don't know the pain and challenge and suffering of being a non-native speaker. I've lived in another country, and I know a little bit about immigration, but I don't know the fear of worrying about that you're going to be taken away. I don't know the pain and suffering of being a woman in a male-dominated culture. I don't know the pain and suffering of racial bias, of discrimination. I don't know what it's like. I don't know the pain and sense of lostness that comes from being incarcerated. I don't know the pain of addiction, the challenge to overcome something that you're not sure you can overcome ever because you have a chemical dependency. I don't know the pain of losing a parent. I don't know the pain of losing a sibling or a child. I don't know the pain and sting of divorce. I don't know the immense loneliness and suffering of neglect and abuse. I don't know the scars and the woundedness of sexual violence. And I don't know abandonment. I don't know anything about neglect. And I know that these things create deep and enduring wounds, especially when they happen in childhood. We carry them, the trauma and the pain. In fact, scientists tell us that this kind of trauma, when it happens as a young person, actually changes our very cells. That our DNA itself somehow has an impact, is impacted by this kind of trauma, that mysteriously it can be passed on to other generations. But I do know my wound. I was born with what they used to call a deformity, a facial deformity. And now I like to call it a facial difference. Sounds a little better. I don't know that I realized it consciously until I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. I grew up in a very loving home with parents who treated me the same. I do remember frequent trips to the hospital, waiting for a long time in a hallway full of chairs to see a doctor. I remember going into the barber shop one day. It was like a good old boy barber shop. Red, white, and blue pole outside. You walk into a cloud of smoke. Girly magazines on the table. Surly language. And I remember sitting down there just as a kid, just waiting to get my hair cut. And I remember a heavy gentleman walking through the doors, sitting down in the chair and getting ready to get a cut. And all of a sudden he noticed me. And he said, "Boy, that kid has an effed up face." And in some ways, that word that we all hear, it's shocking, stuck with me. And every time I hear that word, it almost goes back to that moment when I was just 4 years old. I know what it's like to be made fun of, to be bullied, to be picked on. I know the pain of being poked and prodded at the doctor's office. I've had over 40 plus surgeries in my life. I know what it's like as a kid to worry about being put to sleep and not knowing if you're going to wake up. I know the toll of chronic pain. I know the pain of being a daily victim of people whispering and sneering or just turning away, avoiding eye contact, so not to even engage. And I wondered for a very, very long time, until I have a beautiful family of my own, would anybody love me? I know what it's like to suffer to such a degree that you just want to give up and give in. And you don't want to go even a single day further. I know the burden of submerging your inner life, your inner self, just to be accepted by others. And I know what it's like to have to put on a mask, to play a game, just to be noticed. And I think I know a little bit of the pain and the suffering of injustices and unfairness. So I may not be familiar with your particular wound, your particular pain, but I am just as intimately aware of the pain and brokenness of the human experience. And I also know about those inner voices, that inner critic trying to convince us that we're bad or no good or a nobody or ugly or stupid or unworthy or unlovable. You know the voices I'm talking about in your head that you play over and over again? And these voices are spiritually devastating because they drown out a perpetual voice that is always trying to name us as the beloved child of God. But for some reason, our pain and our brokenness gets in the way. It thickens the wall of our self to such a degree that we either refuse or just can't hear that sacred voice. And that's the message we need to hear so desperately. I recently took this message to a group of men and women who were in a local recovery program. And we talked quite openly and beautifully about our pain and our wounds. And I remember a young woman. She was shy, petite, 30-something African-American woman. And she looked weary, road weary. And after we had talked for a while, and we had done a little bit of Q&A, and she looked at me and she said, "Mr. Bryan, you know about all that stuff that you said that you don't know anything about?" She said, "I know about that stuff." I wasn't sure what to say. I said, that must hurt. Yes, she said. I said, "I see you." And she looked back at me and said, "We see each other." And together we were grappling with this truth. I know this truth as deeply as I know anything. It's that if we don't transform our pain, we will transmit it. If we don't transform our suffering, our pain, our woundedness, we will give it to others. You know what I'm talking about? Across from the spectrum, we move across the spectrum from some sort of inward pain and self-loathing to outward hostility. And maybe that's not your thing, but maybe just a quiet loneliness, a kind of numbness that develops over a while. No highs, no lows, just flatlined. But most certainly, if you don't heal your pain, you're going to give it to others, even to those you love most of all in the world. In the end, you can't avoid the reality and the realities of your pain, and eventually it leads us all to death. Now, Pastor Dwayne isn't here. So I don't know about you, but I am a careful listener of the pastor's sermons. And I think he is a tremendous preacher. But there's this word that he uses over and over again, and I dare him not to use it in a sermon. I don't think he can. He talks about realities. Have you ever heard that from him? It's all the time. Realities. The reality of prayer. The reality of our brokenness. The realities of our lives. The reality of Jesus. The realities. And I think what he wants us to clue in on is that he wants us to be conscious to these things happening around us. And we know that he's been through his own realities over the last few years, dealing consciously with his own pain. And he desperately wants us to hear. He desperately wants us to be present. He desperately wants us to break out of our numbness and our resistance to sit in what is real. The reality is that you have to go into your pain. You have to find it. You have to look at it. You got to scratch it. You've got to befriend it even. Wounds that fester have to be lanced. Scars that tighten have to be released. If you ever want healing, you have to go to your pain. And maybe you're not quite ready, and that's okay. Maybe you don't quite know where it is located. That's okay. God is patient. But you have to go there. You don't have to go alone. You don't have to go all at once. You don't have to go without help. You don't have to go without being gentle to yourself in the journey that you're on, but you got to go. Because there's no way out but through. Even for Jesus, there was no way out but through. Jesus is dealing with realities now. Dwayne said last week, he said, Jesus is on the cross, but he's still on mission. But if I can suggest that things have shifted just a little bit now, as he looks down at his mother and he looks down at his best friend, now he's dealing with the reality of his own death. Now he's making plans. He's getting his affairs in order. He's saying, Mother, I'm not going to be around. Here, this, my friend, be with him. My friend, you're not going to have me around. Here, be comforted by my mother. There's no way out now, at least not without going through. Not for Mary, not for his mother, not for his best friend, not for his followers, and not for Jesus, and not for the whole world. Had this picture back here. So this is a picture from the Hubble Space Telescope. NASA puts out an Advent calendar from Hubble Space Telescope that I've enjoyed through Advent. And this is a picture looking way out into the universe. And you see this little ring that emerges there. This is billions of light years away, by the way. But there is a cluster in the middle there, a cluster of galaxies that is so thick and so dense that light cannot pass through. And so what light does is it travels around the cluster to where we can see it from Hubble. And so those little rings, it's called an Einstein ring, is what emerges as the light travels around that cluster. Now I've got another picture, if we can pop to it. Again, this is looking way out into the universe, and the resolution is not great on the screen, but you're looking at galaxies, many galaxies. So you think about, we live in the Milky Way with, I don't know, millions and billions of stars. Well, you're looking at many millions of galaxies. And again, there's a cluster right in the middle, a cluster of galaxies. But instead of it being so thick, this time you can see through it. And actually, the galaxies, the way that they're there, they actually create they bend space and time in such a way that it becomes like a lens that actually magnifies our vision so that we can see even deeper into the cosmos than what we would typically be able to see. So instead of the light being blocked, you see that big light in the middle, it actually comes through in much more brilliant form. The evangelist John, he is in his story to us about Jesus, starts at the beginning. He says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God in the beginning." And this translation of this word is actually the Greek word logos. And this word logos is translated word, but it's much more rich than our English word as it often is. And maybe another way to translate it would be to say that inner logic and the inner meaning, the inner wisdom. And so John is saying, in the beginning was the inner wisdom, the inner logic, the inner meaning of the universe, of all things was there. The Christ was there at the beginning. And then he says, the inner logic, the inner wisdom, the inner meaning of the universe moved into the neighborhood, became flesh, and walked through life as human life, experiencing our pain and our grief, even unto death on a cross. And this traumatic, this violent event that happened on a cross then becomes not a wound that is crusted over, that we can't get through, that we can't see through, that we can't live through, but it becomes like a giant lens, a great way of seeing, a great healing for the world, so that this wound becomes a sacred wound. in which we are all able to move through and see our own lives in the midst of. And your wound can be a sacred wound too. Not a mass, not a cluster that's blocking the light, that we can see just a little bit of the light around. But a wound where we can see a much more vibrant and brilliant reality, a much more beautiful and mysterious reality. But there's no way out but through.